So welcome everyone. Today is the launch of our EBC Thought Leaders webinar series. The purpose of today is really to promote thought leadership in the field of executive coaching, leadership coaching, education coaching, and evidence-based coaching. And I'm very excited to have as our guest speaker today, Leni Wildflower. Leni Wildflower is one of the key leaders in this evidence-based coaching program at Fielding. She founded the program. What year was that, Leni? I think it was in 1996, is that right?
No, early 2000s.
Early 2000s.
Right. That's when I can't quite remember, but
it's been a while ago. We'll just say that. Yeah. Leni, I'm going to read a little bit of your bio just to introduce you, because she has a very impressive background, and she's worked for over 30 years in the field of organizational development, coaching, human relations, and designing programs and interventions for schools, businesses, and nonprofit agencies. She's a graduate of UC Berkeley. She has a master's degree from the University of Hawaii in health management and a PhD from Fielding Graduate University in the School of Human and Organizational Development. Leni's written curricula, conducted trainings, and designed coaching interventions for organizations including RAND Corporation, Santa Monica Hospital, Rape Treatment Center, the Center for Creative Leadership, Conrad Hilton Foundation, U.S. Investigation Service, BP, and First Data Corporation, just to name a few of her clients. The curricula that she wrote for the RAND Corporation and the Conrad Hilton Foundation is used nationally in secondary schools in the USA. Leni Wildflower has also been a faculty member at the Fielding Graduate University for many years, and she also worked in designing the OMOD Master's Program, as well as the Fielding Evidence-Based Coaching Certificate. So welcome, Leni, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Leni's going to be talking today with us about her book, which is The Hidden History of Coaching. And she's got a short presentation just to give us a brief overview of what she learned, and then we're going to have a Q&A interview format, and then also open it up to the audience for any questions you may have after that. So as you have questions, go ahead and put those in the chat room, and you'll get a chance to get those answers from Leni. So Leni, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Terry. You have a biography of mine that's so old. I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, what? That happened during the Punic Wars. Anyway, okay, I am Leni Wildflower. I can't believe that Bev is on the phone, is on this call. Bev, what a wonderful thing to see some of these people who I haven't seen in a while. Dennis I see all the time. Howard I see most of the time. Peter I taught. Anyway, it's lovely. It's absolutely lovely. Okay, I'm going to share my screen and then put up a PowerPoint for you, which will be available to you. I'm particularly interested in the history, what I'll tell you briefly is, first of all, I came of age in the 60s. As many of you know, I was involved in the civil rights movement, in the anti-Vietnam War movement, and I was also pretty contemptuous of self-help. Those people at Esalen who were sitting in hot tubs looking at their belly buttons, none of it. I always thought this was stupid. Why weren't they on the picket line with us, and helping to solve the world's problems? So, at any rate, and I used to say kind of sarcastically, if it weren't for Carl Rogers and Werner Erhard, you wouldn't have coaching. And so I decided to sort of take myself at my own word and to really look more with more rigor into the research. I must tell you, I had so much fun doing this book. There are more nutcases and amazing stories out there from our who I would call our ancestors. So it was great fun. And if you'll notice, there are, this is a whole range of them, including Carl Rogers, and we're going to talk about all these guys, Werner Erhard. But you will notice that there are only 2 women. These are the Myers-Briggs ladies who put together the MBTI. And this is Virginia Satir. But there aren't many women, okay? Where, just to let you know. But also I will tell you that as I developed this book, the book is 50,000 words. I think that's what they say. You can't go more. So I had to make decisions as to which chapters. I had written more chapters than could fit in the book. So I had to make decisions in terms of what I was going to cover. So I covered psychodynamics, behavior change, the human potential movement, the spiritual stuff, the mind-body connection, and I covered stuff like the self and the system. I can name you everything that's not in here, but you don't need to know. These are the big 3, right? The first is Freud and Jung, and I will tell you that the more I read about Jung, the more impressed I was with all of this. Eric Berne is the founder of transactional analysis, which is really sort of based. So that's why we've got him there. I'm just going to read you a couple of quotes because they're just so damn good. Pardon my French. This is Jung on Freud. Like an Old Testament prophet, he undertook to overthrow false gods, to rip the veils away from a mass of dishonesties and hypocrisies. The impetus with which he gave to our civilization sprang from his discovery of an avenue to the unconscious. By evaluating dreams as the most important source of information concerning the unconscious process, he gave back to mankind a tool that seemed irretrievably lost. And this is Carl Jung on Freud, which I do think that is great. I also want to read to you something about Jung, just because Jung comes up here in psychodynamics, and he comes up again in when we're talking about self-help and spirituality. This is from Jung. The real therapy only begins when the patient sees that it is no longer father and mother who are standing in his way, but himself. The therapist too must be present, meeting the patient as an equal partner in the process. He must emerge from his anonymity and give an account of himself, just as he expects his patients to do. Carl Jung got people off of the couch or the bed or wherever Freud had them, sat them opposite him, and he talks about here. This was during, in his later years, my aim became to leave things to chance. Result was that patients would spontaneously report their dreams and fantasies to me, and I would merely ask, what occurs to you in connection with that? Or how do you mean that? Where does that come from? What do you think about it? The interpretations seemed to follow of their own accord from the patient's replies and associations. So clearly, Jung was on to what we call coaching pretty early on. It was clearly not called the same thing or languaged in the same way, but it was very interesting. Somewhat later, we're now talking about early 1900s, there's the behavioral movement, which really results in essentially in CBT. Watson and Skinner, if you remember, like Pavlov, manipulated circumstances to see how they could change behavior of individuals. David Burns is the guy who talked about feeling good, and Aaron Beck, who is here, really gave us CBT. Now, the other story about CBT, which I think is really important, is that I had heard that there were women in San Diego who were therapists who were desperate to figure out how to help work with someone who, say, was a compulsive hand washer or an agoraphobic or had really deep problems when they only had 10 minutes, 10 sessions to get this done in, because insurance was only covering 10 sessions. So out of this kind of desperate space came some of the most interesting stuff that we know about. What they were doing was getting clients to take what do you call it? To try to try something new, to try new behavior, to change their behavior, and see how that worked in very small incremental steps. Okay, the human potential movement, I happen to think, first of all, did not just start with Esalen and Werner Erhard and all those guys. Way back when, Napoleon Hill, that's this guy up here, wrote a book called Think and Grow Rich in the Heart of the Depression. It sold 1 billion copies. And basically, his statement was, you can be a kind person, you can be a spiritual person, or he would call it go to church, you can be a good person, and you can also be rich. I don't know how, like many self-help books, how anybody used this book in the middle of depression is not clear to me, but he was one of the early guys. We're talking about the 1930s. At the same time, this guy, Dale Carnegie, wrote a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. Now, I'm going to read you a Carnegie quote because it knocked me out when I saw it in the book. Try to understand the other person's point of view. Remember that other people may be totally wrong, but they don't think so. Don't condemn them. Any fool can do that. Try to understand them. Only wise, tolerant, exceptional people can even try to do that. Don't criticize, condemn, or complain. Instead of condemning people, let's try to understand them. Let's try to figure out why they do what they do. That's a lot more profitable and intriguing than criticism, and it breeds sympathy, tolerance, and kindness. Well, there you go. He was clearly one of our forebearers, if you want to put it that way. I also have Dr. Bob and Bill W. I happen to believe that the 12-step program and the kinds of things they ask you to do in recovering from alcoholism or drug addiction or anything is very similar to what we do. It's and it's an extraordinary thing. These guys had God on their side, as Bob Dylan would say. Okay, so here are the more current guys. This is Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow, Werner Erhard, and Will Schutz. The Will Schutz story is pretty interesting because Will Schutz was at Harvard originally, where he designed the 5-B instrument, which is it's one of the few instruments that isn't completely neutral. So it's kind of using it is a little different, but it's certainly an interesting and provocative instrument. I'm sure Terry's been qualified in it, because he's qualified in everything. Terry may win the prize, my God. Anyway, I want to just read you one bit of from Carl Rogers. When I'm at my best, I discover another characteristic. I find that I'm closest to my inner intuitive self when I'm somehow in touch with the unknown in me, when perhaps I'm in a slightly altered state of consciousness in the relationship, then whatever I do seems to be full of healing. Then simply my presence in releasing. And when I can relax and be close to the transcendental core of me, then I may behave in strange and impulsive ways in a relationship, ways which I cannot justify rationally, which have nothing to do with my thought processes. But these strange behaviors turn out to be right in some odd way. Our relationship transcends itself and becomes part of something larger. Profound growth and healing and energy are present. So this guy clearly was on to stuff that we're onto now. And all of them, incidentally, well, I'll go into the Eastern religion guys who are also at Esalen. This is Aldous Huxley. And I will say, from my point of view, Aldous Huxley is pretty astounding. He's you know what we did. He's you know, he didn't survive as long as a lot of these guys did. He's quite astounding, and he's in 1954, in his 60th year, Huxley's essay, The Doors of Perception, was published. He took his title from Blake's strange and beautiful poem, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Huxley did this having taken mescaline. And then, of course, we have who comes afterwards but this band called The Doors, who are clearly have named themselves after Huxley. He is a very, I think, a profound and interesting philosopher or spiritual teacher. This is Alan Watts. This is Allen Ginsberg, and this is Ram Dass. And all of them hung out and were around Esalen, believe it or not. This is William James, and I must tell you, here's a quick quote from William James. Act as if what you do makes a difference. It does. The greatest discovery of my generation is that a human being can alter his life by altering his attitudes. This was written and thought of in the 1870s. Incredible. This is William James, the brother of Henry James, whose novels I find hard to read, but William was pretty amazing. Here's Jung again. Here's Maslow, and this is Assagioli. Now, Assagioli and Maslow started something called transcendental psychology, and what they were talking about was the connection between humanist psychology and some kind of transcendence. So they started a journal of transcendental psychology. I have no idea if this still exists. Maybe some of you guys do, but they were very, they were really talking about the relationship between being healthy, feeling whole, and having higher levels of awareness or higher level experiences that were on a higher level. Okay. just to let you know, this is what was going on for about 10 years at the Esalen Institute. Look at who was frequenting this place. I don't know if you know everyone here, but there's a pretty amazing list of people. And I guess for the recording, I'm going to read them. Fritz Perls, Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow, Virginia Satir, B.F. Skinner, Aldous Huxley, Ram Dass, Timothy Leary, Linus Pauling, Will Schutz, Arnold Toynbee, Paul Tillich, Buckminster Fuller, Ida Rolfe, Alan Watts, Gregory Bateson, Joseph Campbell, Fritjof Capra, Richard Feynman, Amory Lovins, Deepak Chopra, Stanislav Grof, R.D. Laing, Rollo May, Susan Sontag, Marion Woodman, Joan Baez, Ansel Adams, Ken Kesey. Now, depending on, you might know some of them or some of you might know all of them. One of the big learnings that came out from me of doing this research was the power of collaboration. And these guys fought with each other, they talked with each other, they disseminated ideas. They were that kind of collaborative instinct made for a kind of amazing experience. Okay, mind-body connection. Again, like I said, I've been eclectic in terms of this. Wilhelm Reich really was a strange character and had a lot of, and quite controversial. But basically his concept was that that just talking about your psyche or your mind or your feelings didn't deal with the body. And he developed a whole process around the body, including something called an orgone machine, which he tried to sell across state lines. He got in trouble, he ended up in prison, and he actually died in prison. He was a very odd guy. Incidentally, the number of people who fled Hitler, including Reich, went to Harvard, fled, as my husband said, the meta story is, I fled the Nazis, came to Harvard and invented a theory. So there's a kind of a fascinating connection between a lot of these guys. What Alexander Lowen did, he's the guy in the middle, is he said, look, body is important, but once you're manipulating the body or doing something with the body, you need to also talk about the emotions that come up. So he really elaborates on it. And Dan Siegel is the neuroscience guy. And I'll just give you one quick quote of Dan Siegel. Our mirror neurons allow us to feel someone else's pain literally, so that the pain we feel inside is exactly the same pain that the other person feels. This forms the basis for empathy. So this is a scientific exploration into empathy. Fantastic. Okay, the self and the system. So obviously, any of us who've worked in corporations or organizations coaching know that we need to pay attention to the context in which the client is working. So these guys, Kurt Lewin and Wilfred Bion, both in different ways developed group processes which were highly influential, and many people, many of you may have experienced Lewin or Bion. Bion was more in Britain, but very powerful group leaders. The families are Murray Bowen, Salvador Minuchin, and Virginia Satir. And again, I've just picked three of the people that kind of struck me. Murray Bowen was the triangle man who developed this notion of triangles, which I don't know if you use, but I've used it before with clients to help them understand what's going on. So a triangle is when Terry and I get together to discuss Howard, right? And I'm developing my intimacy with Terry by kind of talking about Howard. Mother and child do this together, talking about dad. And Bowen's theory I'm quoting from Bowen, triangles are forever, at least in families. Once the emotional circuitry of a triangle is in place, it usually outlives the people who participate in it. If one member of the triangle dies, another person usually replaces it. Actors come and go, but the play lives on through generations. Very encouraging. Mnuchin talked about poverty and the influence of poverty and the social circumstances on people. During the 60s and early 70s, we began to explore not just family therapy, but the social context in which families were embedded. Okay, and then over here, and Virginia Satir was just a lovely woman who managed to help people throughout her life and basically did family therapy. Gregory Bateson is probably one of the geniuses of our time. I'm going to read you just briefly. This is Fritjof Capra, who is a philosopher and spiritual man, talking about Gregory Bateson. Bateson championed a new way of thinking which is extremely relevant for our time. Thinking in terms of relationships, connections, patterns, and context. As we replace the Newtonian metaphor of the world as a machine by the metaphor of the network, and as complexity becomes the principal focus in science, the kind of systemic thinking that Bateson advocated is becoming crucial. Probably we owe a huge amount to this man. And then there's Fritz Perls. And there's such controversy around Fritz Perls because some of the Gestalt therapists and people who were involved in putting together what Gestalt therapy is say that Fritz Perls sort of went his own way and designed Gestalt therapy in his own way. And I'll just give you an example. There were several very funny incidences about this, but this is Fritz Perls. Okay, I would like you to put phoniness in that chair. Talk to phoniness. Now let's finish up by putting that smirk in the chair. Talk to your smirk. Can you talk to that memory once more? Change seats. Be the memory. Say bye-bye, memory. So if you've ever worked with anyone where they've had you change chairs, which is a very interesting way to work, even as a coach, I think we owe that to Fritz Perls. He was quite eccentric and not easy to love. The one thing that I did want to talk just for a moment is I wanted to talk about Werner Erhard, and these are the big names. And here's Werner Erhard. Erhard had done his homework. He had chewed his way through a large piece of what we rarely recognize it as such, is as much our cultural heritage as Shakespeare or calculus. The sometimes respectable, sometimes not idea that practices having to do with mobilizing the human psyche towards personal success in the world of business. And whatever we feel about Werner Erhard, he actually changed people's opinion about many things. Observations. Our history is long and complex. The essential framework of coaching derives from overlapping theories and traditions. New ways of thinking have been derived either from imitating an existing idea or from challenging it. Some of the most fertile learning moments in our history came through collaborative enterprises, or when one therapist learned from or studied with another. Perhaps our greatest debt is to the theorists and practitioners who believe passionately that people could live richer and more fulfilled lives. Implications for coaching. We stand on the shoulder of giants. If you've gone to fielding as a PhD student, you learned this expression. I don't know if it's given to any other university, but we've learned this. Nothing we do in coaching is new. We don't invent things. We have a body of knowledge formed either cognitively, or even unconsciously. So when we design something or when we figure out something, we are doing it with the knowledge. It's important to understand that there are people that tried and did all kinds of variations of what we're doing now. Coaching has captured some of the most interesting aspects of human behavior and created a brilliant new way to help relatively healthy people make changes in their lives. And then I am quoted from the book. Coaching is remarkably diverse, but rests solidly on established principles. It has the capacity to make individual lives more fulfilled, but could also have a transformative impact on society. Given its profound origins and the richness of its history, we should expect of it nothing less. Okay, guys. There's a Huxley quote to leave you with. There are a great many potentialities for rationality, for affection, and kindliness, for creativity, still lying latent in man.
All right, thank you, Leni.
You're welcome.
So
I hope, yeah.
So I just have a few questions for you.
Okay.
So what prompted your research, you to research and write about the history of coaching?
Well, I think, like I said, I was sort of when I was asked at Fielding to design the coaching program, I was slightly skeptical. I thought, this is just a fly-by-night deal, and I think it was my own snideness, quite honestly, about coaching that made me decide to really look into it and to have some kind of, what is this? What's happening? The other thing that I think I mentioned earlier is that I was very political during the 60s and 70s and was intolerant of anybody who was trying to understand themselves or feel better about themselves or learn more about themselves. And one of the things that I think is so interesting is that as time has progressed, certainly my thinking has progressed, but also young people now, they want to heal themselves and they want to heal the planet. And they don't see a difference. There's no difference. And it's fantastic in that way. I think that the dichotomy that existed in those days doesn't exist anymore.
Great, interesting. So to build on that idea, what is the relationship of self-help practice to coaching?
Well, I mean, it's so interesting because honestly, what is it but taking relatively healthy people and helping them live richer more fulfilling lives or solve problems. And so as things have progressed in coaching, we realize the huge importance of this self-help stuff. And you know, like any profession, it's filled with hucksters and you know, Jesus as CEO, and you know, any kind of crazy book that's out there. And there are millions of books. One of the interesting things you learn when you write a book like this is that people say self-help books are purchased but seldom read. But as long as they're purchased, we don't care. And so that was one of so it was interesting because you know, for me, especially going back to the 30s and looking at people who had this notion, you know, way before I thought, you know, I thought self-help happened with, you know, Esalen. And guess what? Dale Carnegie talked about it way back when, you know, and
visual too.
Also, I webinar.
Who am I talking to over here?
I put them on mute. I think they didn't realize they weren't muted. Okay.
Okay.
Great. So tell us a little bit about the relationship of psychology to coaching.
Well, I mean, I think that it's critical, and quite honestly, you know, one of the things I spend a lot of time talking about when I'm teaching is that you are the instrument. You're it. So your ability to know yourself, to have worked on yourself in whatever way that looks like, to have worked on yourself and to feel good about yourself is going to affect the kind of coaching you do. There's no way that it can't. So I, you know, my own feeling is that we owe a lot to psychology. We don't go back. You know, part of, as coaches, we don't spend time asking the why question, as you would know. But again, we're working with relatively healthy people. I think that one of the interesting things is that we're at a time historically where there's a lot of people who want coaching works for a lot of people. And in part it works because they're relatively okay, but they might want a richer life, or they might want a different way of looking at something, or they might want a different job. And all of those things have no stigma attached to them. They have no baggage. And the business industry has picked up on coaching like crazy, you know, so we're in a very good place in that way.
So what do you think was the most important learning for you personally in doing this research?
The power of collaboration and community. Whatever went on at Esalen was so much greater than, I mean, I read a lot about Esalen and think about it. The founding fathers. There's the group that I was in the early 60s wrote a pamphlet, collaboratively wrote a pamphlet called the Port Huron Statement. Again, the power of collaboration created, at least with Esalen, and I think it made me think about what other times historically did collaboration work. The Impressionists, they all painted with one another. They bought each other's work. Sometimes you're looking at two paintings of the same thing and they're two different artists. They were painting together. And this is, I mean, I think it's so interesting. And I guess for me, that made me think the Esalen experience was like wow, that must have been incredible. And it just, the sum is greater than an individual part. So that was very important learning for me.
Excellent.
Howard, to everyone. Napoleon Hill spoke about the mastermind, one of the earlies. Yes, I think he did. Howard, tell us what you mean by that, would you?
Sure. So Napoleon Hill, the author of Think and Grow Rich, and you were right earlier that, this was the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. The big, the people, Dale Carnegie's, the bankers, the oil people. And so Napoleon Hill was just a studier of people. And one of his, as he was developing his ideas and insights around, how to grow rich, how to get rich, this idea of bringing people together, not necessarily of the same mind, but of different minds who perhaps looked at an issue, a topic differently, could add value and help help an individual or a team for that matter, kind of perhaps look at the problem, the issue in a new way. And to bring people together in a mastermind on a continuous basis, I mean, it takes a lot of commitment. Masterminds don't just start and end, 4 weeks later, they continue. And you also are looking, because the opportunity is everybody can come in, help, get help, assistance to solve a problem, and also get some very honest feedback. And so when you talked about collaboration, with the Esalen, the mastermind, though it has its rules, it seems to me that that was probably one of the, at least the modern age, one of the earliest forms of collaboration, and it continues very much to this day. There's mastermind groups all over the place. I'm in a couple.
Well, and the other thing is that fielding was an obvious example of collaboration and of the importance of it. When I went through it, of cluster groups and of groups that cohorts and groups that work, that lean on each other, learn from each other, have in the best adult learning sense. So I guess that was, Terry, just to answer, and thank you, Howard, for your contribution too. That was the best thing that I felt happened. Anybody else have a question? Don't have any questions? Peter, you mentioned business has picked up coaching, but how about the everyday what?
Individual?
Everyday individual. Well, I mean, I think that the interesting thing is that there's very few people I've met who are not open to coaching. They're not open to who are not open to being coached. When I first began coaching, there was a far more of that. Also, I don't know, maybe Terry had a similar experience, but when I began coaching in some companies, it was people were told by the CEO, it's either coaching or you're out. So you can imagine how excited they were about coaching. I think that developmental coaching or allowing people to grow or encouraging growth is really become the most, it's become synonymous with coaching. So we really have a different situation. It's not punitive. It's not, we're not going back to discover stuff about childhood. And a lot of people who get coaching have already had therapy or have had some kind of sort of connection. So I think that it's an opportunity for most people. You need to figure out your elevator pitch, but But other than that, you're good to go, Peter. Dawn. Oh, I have worked with a few organizations lately who have, I think, shifted. Dawn, tell me what the rest of it says.
It's the intent of coaching from personal development, and instead are using it as a performance feedback from manager to employee. The employees are now resting on the coaching conversation, or resisting, sorry, the coaching conversation because it has developed a negative connotation. Just wondered if others are seeing the shift and how they are approaching it.
Wow.
I guess, Dawn, I'm not seeing that shift. I think that was the previous challenge, is that HR typically only brought in coaching for the quote-unquote problem executives that needed to fix some fatal flaws. Otherwise, they were either up or out. But that was pretty much, I would say, 8 years ago. Today, by far, the largest investment in coaching is developmental, mostly for high potentials. So I'm not saying that you still don't have some of this kind of what I would call last-ditch effort coaching, or and 360s are very common, but the 360s today are confidential and only designed for the person receiving the feedback, and HR nor managers have access to that data. So I'm not really seeing too much of what you're seeing, what you're mentioning here at the moment.
Dawn, I would suggest calling the CEO on this because and refusing to coach if that's what's happening. I think that any misuse of coaching that we identify or we see, it's probably depending on your circumstance, obviously, or any of that, but it's incumbent upon us to call out the misuse of coaching in organizations. Dawn, I definitely have, but it surprised me, this shift, and it's more with lower, I don't see the rest of it.
Lower level employees, yeah.
Yeah, lower level employees, right. Well, I'll tell you, it's I don't, that's a shame. That's a real shame. There are shysters out there. There's Jenny Rogers wrote a piece on all of the kind of pyramid schemes that are out there, the sort of like Howard would say, think and grow rich schemes, and there are lots of there's lots of misuse of it, and people attempting to get rich coaching. I start most of my programs saying, if you want to coach, if you want to make a lot of money, don't go into coaching. Coaching's like being a therapist or a teacher or a social worker. It is, you want to make money, go into IT or high tech or, whatever. but it's important to know it's a calling, hopefully for most people. And as a calling, for me, it's been extraordinary because I think that it's I believe that the world needs intelligent, skillful discussions, and we're people teaching people one-on-one, usually, how to speak skillfully to each other, how to tolerate a different point of view, how to function with that. Even if it's a calling, we should still know how to run a business, of course, Howard. But at any rate, I when I think about America, or I think about the world, I think about the need for ability to have skillful discussions with one another, and it's not always there, as we well know. It's not always there, so it's important for us. I just wanted to mention briefly that there's a whole history of the history of an intelligence, beginning with IQ and ending with a whole range of psychometrics, right? And including Howard Gardner's different kinds of intelligences. These were all breakthroughs. And there is a whole history of adult development, beginning with Freud talking about children, and then people moving on to, to the Harvard guys and greater theories of adult awareness. I couldn't get all of them in the book, and I think now, and I just, at any rate, I wanted to let you know that there were other whole streams of work that happened, and people who collaborated with each other, and it was great. It was such fun. Anybody want to write a book? I will. The only Volume 2, Bev. The only caveat, or the only plug I want to make, I don't care about hidden history in terms of whether you're interested or not in the book I wrote. But my husband, Joe Treasure, is a fantastic editor. Want to write a book? Howard will tell you. Want to write a book? Joe can make the book work for you. So he's I live with him in London. At any rate, any other comments or any other thoughts? We're just about ready to wrap up here. I've loved talking with you guys and seeing some of you.
And by the way, if anyone is interested in the hidden history of coaching, it is available on Amazon, as you can see here. Just a tiny plug for all the work that Leni has put into this. So thank you today, and we do.
Thank you, Charlene. Thank you. Yes.
And thank you, Leni, for coming today and being our first thought leader in this series of webinars. And just as FYI, we're going to be continuing to offer this on a monthly basis. And you'll be able to see where these are on the Fielding website. And as some of you may know, we also have a community of practice. So if you go to coach.fielding.edu and click on the EBC blog, you can see where our community of practice is at, and you can actually learn more about the community of practice and register to be a part of that online community, which meets virtually at least twice a month. So please check that out. Lastly, we also want to just invite any of our guests who might not know that much about Fielding. We do offer a year-long certificate program in comprehensive evidence-based coaching, which is an accredited coach training program with the ICF. So we'd be pleased to talk to you more about that, and you can also see our website at coach.fielding.edu. So thank you all for coming today, and thank you, Dr. Wildflower. So we wish you all the best, and hopefully see you next time.
Dr. Hildebrandt. Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.